Indeed, thank you for taking time to talk to us and to preserve this for posterity, for the centennial of the WCA. So we appreciate it.
Well, I'm humbled and honored to be here.
Well, we want to start off asking about your beginnings, your legal beginnings. What made you decide to become an attorney, and describe your law school experience?
I didn't actually intend to be a practicing lawyer. When I was at Carolina, I was really fascinated by the folks who were running the university. President Bill Friday, Farabee Taylor, all of the people over at Duke. You had Terry Sanford. All the big names had one thing in common: they had law degrees. And so I thought, I think that might be what I want to do, and a law degree might be a path to doing that. And this sounds like hubris, but it's really not. I only applied to Yale Law School because, in my view, and there's some truth to this, it had a flexible enough curriculum that I could morph it into getting ready for that kind of career. Did a lot of that in law school. I got to law school, though, and I tell my students this story to quiet their nerves, and it turned out actually to be law school. It turned out not to be a graduate school, but it turned out to be property and torts and contracts and civil procedure, and more than I expected. And 2 weeks into law school, I went to the dean of students and said, "This isn't for me, I'm going home. And I know it's so hard to get in here that maybe you can get the next person in because it's only 2 weeks in. But this just isn't for me." And he said, "Listen, you think you're the first person who's ever sat there and said that, particularly folks coming from a rural background where you're the only one from your school or the only one from your region here. Here's my deal. Finish out a semester, and if you do that, you can come back any time in the next 5 years, no questions asked. If you leave now, you'll never see Yale again." So I went back and unpacked and gritted my way through the first semester and left. Went back to, I said, there's another path to what I want to do. I went back to Carolina, got a master's degree in education. And then it just gnawed on me. I'd always been successful and never left anything undone. And so a year and a half later, I packed back up, moved back to New Haven, and had a really wonderful experience. Finished my law degree. But the jobs that I wanted just weren't right there at the time. And North Carolina was a really parochial place in the late 70s when I came out. And having a Yale law degree was not a help. None of the local law firms were the least bit interested in talking to me. So my only path back was a clerkship. And that was hard because most of the appellate judges in North Carolina and the federal judges only hired from their school, which was usually either Carolina or Wake Forest. The two people who gave me an interview were Jim Exum and Frank Dupree. Exum was in his first year on the Supreme Court. He was the young, hip, liberal motorcycle riding justice. I fell in love with him. Thought I'd do anything to work for this man. Dupree was a gruff, conservative Republican. I was uncomfortable in the interview. I thought we'll never get along. Went back to New Haven. Time went by, past when either of them had said they would make a decision. I thought, well, it didn't work out. So I'm getting on my bike to ride back to my apartment. And a buddy yells at me, this is what we did, how we had to do it in those days. There's a note on the bulletin board to call some judge in North Carolina. And I said, pray God, let it be Exum. It was Dupree. So I went back into the payphone, called Judge Dupree. He offered me a 2-year clerkship. Protocol is you take it. I took it and was happy because I was married by then, and we were having our first child, and I needed a job. So I knew we could get home. So it was okay. It was fine. Got on my bike, rode to my apartment, and in the mailbox was the letter from Exum offering me his clerkship that day. That day.
What did you do?
I'm a man of my word. I'd already taken the job. So I wrote Justice Exum and said, I'm sorry, but circumstances meant that the offer from Judge Dupree came first, and I've accepted it. I'm so sorry. And he still, when he sees me, we still laugh about it. Like,
But was that ultimately a good thing?
It was a perfect thing. You can so misjudge someone. He turned out to be the most remarkable man. And he and I really developed close to our father-son relationship over the years. He opened doors for me really long before they should have been opened, much too young in age, but he had more confidence in me than I had in myself. He was a master jurist. The lawyers fought to get in front of him because he was such a brilliant trial judge. And I walked into that courtroom the first day I clerked, and I was just smitten. And I thought, maybe this is what I want to do.
So that leads me to skip a few questions.
That's what I know, yeah.
Tell me about, it sounds like he was a mentor in your career, clearly.
My whole life.
So tell me about, through your career, the importance of a mentor and mentee relationship, and then you as a mentor and mentee relationship. Can you give us those examples?
Sure. There has never been a big decision in my life that I didn't go when he was still alive straight to his chambers and say, this has been offered to me, or I'm thinking about doing this, and even in personal issues, my marriage is struggling a little bit. What would you help me with there? What do you think I ought to do? Just constantly. And he would be on the lookout. He would call me and say, I just saw this job open at Carolina. Are you ready to make that jump you always said you were going to make? I mean, I think I maybe could help you do that. And then the joy of being a federal judge myself was I had about 50 law clerks in a long career, and they became like my children. Every single one of them. I would sometimes get 300 and 400 applications for one spot. So I really did have a choice among brilliant law students, and never was disappointed. It's funny, when I went to the law school, I inherited Dean Essery's executive assistant, lovely lady, guarded my office and schedule, with zeal. Nobody got to me that didn't go through her. And all my former law clerks were just used to having instant access to me. So they would just show up at the law school and say, I need to see him. Drove her crazy. Who are all these folks who think they're entitled to just walk into the dean's office with no appointment? And I said, well, you know what? You just got to think about them like my children. They know I'm busy. They're not here to chitty chat. They're here because they've got something going on in their life and they want to tell me about it and talk about it.
What do you hope those mentees say about your mentorship?
Well, I've heard them say some things, and then it always makes me happy. I think they say that it was a great learning experience, that I was a smart, prepared judge, and I relied on them for advice. I relied on their writing ability, their research ability. But better than that, I think they would say we became good friends. Clerking for me was a little different than clerking for a lot of judges because I was a circuit rider. For a lot of the time I was on the bankruptcy court, it was just me and Judge Small. He didn't like to leave Raleigh, but the statute said we were supposed to hold court in 6 cities. So I handled, he would occasionally go to Fayetteville, but I took the other 4. So my law clerks and I were on the road together, probably about half the time in Wilmington, New Bern, Greenville, Elizabeth City. We had breakfast together, we went to court together, we went to the gym together, we went to dinner together, we had an after-dinner toddy together, so probably a lot more clerking than any of them really wanted, but that was the way it went. So there wasn't much about them I didn't know, and frankly, there wasn't much about me they didn't know.
I want to back up because I want to ask, go back to you made a comment about being a Yale law graduate and how down here that didn't matter and it was cared. I want to ask why you think that is for that cultural difference, because we look now and so many of our lawyers.
Oh no! Now having Ivy League law degree counts when you come down here for looking for a job. Well, North Carolina was just an insular place at that time. It was just a very small community. It was all white community practically in terms of the bar. We were just going through the fights about integrating the bar in those years. Yale was just thought to be, Yale's where Bobby Seale had protests, and it was just thought to be this liberal out there place, and who could trust somebody who had that kind of education. So What flipped it was working for Dupree, because he was the patriarch of the bar here. And I mean, literally, this is how it used to go. My second year, he said, where do you want to go next year? I need to make a call. Talk about a mentor. And I said, well, these are the 3 or 4 firms I'm looking at. But, Governor Sanford's got his own firm, and I really respect him. I think that might be where I'd like to go. And he said, all right. So in a week, I had an offer from Sanford Adams.
So take me along there. Tell me about your path to get to where you are now.
So I clerked for Dupree for 2 years, really successfully, and I've had incredible opportunities. People often say, "What's your favorite job?" I often say, "I think it was being a law clerk." I mean, that might have been the most fun I ever had in a job. And I went to Sanford Adams, and I was happy there. They're great lawyers, and people Ed Gaskins and Hugh Stevens and John Beard and Catherine Arrowwood, and really great, smart people that I was working with. And I'd been there about a year, and Dupree became the chief judge. Those rotate in the federal courts. You serve a 7-year term, then you have to give it to the next senior judge. It became his turn, and he called me, and he said, listen, first thing I'm going to do is fire the clerk. He's a total incompetent. And I know this is going to sound odd, but when he's messing around and stuff, it's none of your business. You're always trying to reorganize the place. You didn't understand why it ran so badly. Why don't you, as a favor to me, come over here for a couple of years and be the clerk of court and just get the place running and in shape. And I promise you, you can go back to Sanford Adams or any other firm. I'll make it happen. You won't miss a beat. And I thought, I could either be answering interrogatories in my windowless office, or I could be running the federal courts in Eastern North Carolina. I think I'll do that. And I did. And I loved it. I really did love it. Partly because it was chaos. If you take a job, it's really good to go right behind an incompetent, if you have any degree of competence, because anything you did was good. But we set up, I designed it, we set up a whole new calendaring and case management system, and I've got the clippings to prove it. We went from 79th in the country in speed of disposition to first in 2 years. And I just told the judges, if you will just be the engine in the courtroom so people know when we calendar something it's going to happen, then I can make everything else work. But I have to have you as the engines. There's not going to be continuances. They've got to show up and try their case. And so that was really fun. And I got ready then. I'd done it 2 or 3 years, and we were talking. And in 1979, the Federal Magistrate Act passed. And for the first time, it made federal magistrate judges real judges. Before, they were really just criminal committing judges. This gave them incredible authority across the civil and criminal dockets. And there was a provision in it that only Dupree found, I don't know who wrote it in, that said that if your clerk of court was otherwise qualified, you could doubly appoint. You could make your clerk also be a magistrate judge. And so, I got to be the clerk when I was 29. The AO says I'm still the youngest of the history of the country to ever have that job. 31 on the 5th anniversary of my bar membership, because you had to have 5 years. I got sworn in as a federal magistrate judge. So I did both jobs for the next 11 years, and it was crazy. I had 3 secretaries, had 50 people who worked for me on the 5th floor where I ran the court. I had a chambers and law clerks on the 6th floor where I tried cases, and I just went up and down all day long, between the 2 jobs. But it was exhilarating. And a lot of big cases hit the court at that time. All the asbestos litigation started. I did all the discovery motions in all of the asbestos cases, hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of them. We had some big fraud cases that I was heavily involved in. And then it got to be too much. It was too much. I had, a couple of things that happened. One was the AO, the Administrative Office in Washington, had really decentralized running the federal courts. So I'd really inherited a Mother May I system where all decisions were made in Washington. To a few years later, a new director, they were just giving me, take all these millions and run your court. So it took a lot more involvement to really run the place. And by that point, I was actually the most senior magistrate judge on the court. So the district judges were just always coming to me and saying, you do this one. You know, this, I know you're busy, but you got to do this one for me. You know, it's a big case and you got to do all the pretrial stuff. And I was just, had figured out I've got to leave. I've got to go do something else. And then fortuitously and unexpectedly, people often say, how did you get to be a bankruptcy judge? And I say, bad health care in Wilson County. Because the chief bankruptcy judge went to the hospital for what they kept diagnosing as pneumonia that was resisting treatment. And it turned out, they found out about 6 hours before he passed, he had tuberculosis. And they completely missed it and not treated it.
That's so interesting. So that was and that was a chronic thing going on now.
Yeah, and so I still remember the clerk of the bankruptcy court calling me in tears on Saturday morning, and I don't want to sound heartless, but my first thought was, I think I know what I'm going to do next. I think I see where I'm going to move, and I did. I mean, and I did that job for 2 decades, a little over, and loved it. Really, I don't think anybody ever loved being a judge more than I did. I used to say I'd rather try a complex case than go on vacation. And I did try a lot of complex cases. And thought I got to do some remarkable things. We can talk about those while I was a bankruptcy judge. One was Chief Justice Rehnquist put me on the Judicial Conference Committee on Court Administration and Case Management in the 90s. And that was the committee that was overseeing the transition from a paper to an electronic federal court filing system. And I was actually one of the executive sponsors of that process. So I spent enormous amounts of time in Washington sitting around a table with designers and all sorts of people trying to figure out. I was at the table when we came up with the idea for PACER. And I remember saying, do you think if we let people dial into our modems, anybody would come? And now it's a billion-dollar enterprise for how you get all your documents through the federal courts. So that was great fun. And the other thing I got to do was originally, when the judge in Wilson died, they had just built, Judge Mickey Moore is legendary, they just built him a little one-man courthouse in Wilson. And it was very, very clear that if you took this job, that was your duty station. So I commuted out to Wilson for years. But in 2005, we got a third judge, and he was from Greenville, and he wanted Wilson because it was closer to his home. So I got to come back to Raleigh. And the old Century Station Courthouse on Fayetteville Street, it just was sitting there, falling down. The roof leaked. There was asbestos in it. Some of the offices hadn't been occupied since the federal court moved from there to the White Box on Newbert Avenue in the 1960s. And the third floor was completely empty, and I said, I want this for my chambers. And GSA was aghast. They're like, no, we're not going to do that. I mean, it's going to cost millions to renovate this building, and let us just go in one of these skyscrapers over here and build you out a courtroom and chambers and be elegant, and we'll have it fast. And I said, no, this is the oldest courthouse in North Carolina. It's on the National Registry of Historic Spaces. This is the one time we're going to have an opportunity to save it, and we're going to do it. And I spent about 3 years working on the renovations of that building, and it's stunning. I mean, it's just stunning, and it was fun to be able to say I did that.
And then take us through getting to Campbell.
So I'm in my chambers I can't say I didn't benefit from overseeing the renovation because I actually inherited the first federal judge's chambers ever built in North Carolina with crown molding this deep and 16-foot ceilings, and it was pretty cool. And this elegant lady from Alabama cold called on me. She just showed up at my office and asked my assistant if she could see me, and she walked in. And she said she was the head of the search committee that was looking for a new dean at Campbell. And They had gone through a year, and they couldn't bring anybody to the faculty, which I later came to understand why, that they liked. And they declared a failed search, appointed an interim dean. They were back a second year at a search, and they were getting about to the same place. And she said, people just keep mentioning your name as somebody who might be able to get sufficient support to do the job. And I said, ma'am, look around. I work in a movie set. I'm going out of here on a plank. I mean, this is my life. This is my job. I built this place, and this is where I'm going to work. And she just wouldn't take no for an answer. She, kept coming back. And so I went back to where I started. Well, I always thought maybe that's what I'd do with my life. I'd run an educational institution. And I'm probably never going to have another opportunity. So I said, ma'am, I'm not committing to it, but I will write the letter and go through the process. So I wrote my letter, and I went and did my job talk, and I interviewed with the faculty. And literally 8 weeks later, I am flying to San Diego to make a speech. And the provost of the university caught me on the phone changing planes in Dallas. And he said, Judge Leonard, we're naming the new dean of the law school tomorrow morning at 10. And I said, well, Dr. Green, I actually enjoyed the process. I enjoyed getting to know you. I hope whoever he or she is will be very successful. They'll have my full support. And he said, it's you, but we can't go without a dean. He said, so we have a second pick, and the faculty's not going to like her, but if you don't take it, that's who they're going to get, because we can't go another year without the law school having a dean. And I remember saying, when are you going to announce this? And he said, 10 tomorrow morning. I said, I'll call you at 9:30. He said, what? I said, come on, man. You're asking me to give up a lifetime appointment, change my life completely around. I'm away from my wife. I'm away from my friends. I got nobody to talk to about this tonight. I got to think about it a little bit. I'll call you in the morning. And I did, and I took it, and here I am 12 years later.
That's a good story. I love that. I want to ask you, because, you've had all these decades in the law and in different aspects. Yeah. What have been the most significant changes in the legal profession, in your opinion, over your career?
I don't think it's changed as much as people think it has. I mean, that's what I'd tell you. I mean, if when I walk into a courtroom now, which I sometimes do to observe, it feels a lot like the courtroom I walked into 20, 30 years ago. There are more bells and whistles. The electronics have changed it. They aren't changing it as adeptly in North Carolina as we hoped it would, but they'll get there. The transition from paper to electronic, the way you can use exhibits and displays electronically. But the basic advocacy is the same. The rules of evidence have been pretty constant. They haven't really changed, in 20 or 30 years. They haven't even really tinkered with them. The rules of civil procedure about what they were. So I think we exaggerate the change. I know we hear about AI, and I don't know how to gauge that yet. We're trying to figure that out. But I guess, we teach advocacy in a lot the same ways that we used to teach advocacy. I think one of the things that's happened, the biggest change is probably in the civil area is just the decline of the civil trial. And we used to try a lot of civil cases to juries. I mean, in federal court and state court, that's how things got resolved. And now there's mandatory mediation, and so many cases get settled through mediation. A lot of agreements have mandatory arbitration clauses written into them, so you got to go to an arbitrator rather than a judge. So if you look at the numbers of civil trials done in the basic common law courts, the Superior Court, the Federal District Court, they declined, but that's not the whole picture, because in the other courts, the bankruptcy court, the immigration courts, the Social Security courts, the Office of Administrative Hearings, they are going full tilt. They got cases out in the gazoo. They've got years of backlogs. So it's not like civil litigation has gone away. It just has a different face on it now, I think, in a lot of places.
So I want to go back. So many things have not changed, but you mentioned earlier that back in the 70s when you were starting, North Carolina was more insular, and it was not valued that you had an Ivy League education versus now. So would you say maybe a cultural change?
Well, that's fair.
That's
absolutely.
globally,
I think it's happened everywhere, but North Carolina has, well, just look at Raleigh. When I came back to Raleigh in the 70s, it was just this sleepy little backwater of a southern city. Nothing really happened here. There were no real decent restaurants. You went to the K&W to eat. That was about the only place you could go eat. There wasn't much of an art scene. There wasn't much of a music scene. There wasn't a lot of development going on. And now it's, one of the hottest, hippest cities in the world. And I think, that's changed everything, and it's changed law, because it's both made people open up, but it's also attracted people here in ways that it didn't used to. You get national law firms opening Raleigh branches here now. That didn't used to happen.
Well, and describe for me, because you saw it, as it's, knowing that you are running the first law school in Raleigh, that, for a while, Raleigh had the distinction of being the only capital city without.
It's not quite true, but we'd say that. Montpelier only has about 500 people.
Oh, yeah.
But the law school in Vermont is in Burlington. But you're right. It's one of the few. And that wasn't me. That was brilliant Melissa Esri, who came from Baylor to be the dean in Bowie's Creek, and she looked around and said, somebody's coming to Raleigh. It is just too hot a market right now for a law school not to go there. And if we don't claim it, we're just going to be the little rural law school that got left out. And she somehow convinced those trustees that this is what they had to do. And we know now there were 3 other groups at the time doing due diligence about opening a law school in Raleigh. Infolaw was looking at Raleigh as opposed to Charlotte as where they might start a for-profit law school. Elon was toying with coming to Raleigh instead of Greensboro for their law school. And Meredith had begun to do feelers about opening a law school. So, but then all that stopped when we announced that we were making the move and would, be right on Capitol Square in downtown Raleigh. And thank God, because, the prominence of the law school in no small part now derives from our location and what we can offer students that really no other law school in the state, few in the country, can do.
And describe the change to the Wake County legal landscape when Campbell came.
I think it's been phenomenal. Number one, we have worked really hard to be good partners with, we have this great mentorship program, but it's not just ours. Connections is a partnership between this bar association and my law school. We bring in speakers all the time. I have 8 sitting judges who I brought in to teach from me at the law school. We have one of the most vibrant externship programs in the country. I think we have close to 300 pre-approved externships all through the city that my students can choose from. And the thing that's been dear to my heart, because I am a huge believer in experiential education, is that we now have these fabulous clinics that I purposefully not put in the law school. I have put them all over town, serving the people in the areas where they live and work. And I think that has created a buzz in the city like nothing else. I tell folks, you go down to the courthouse and you go to housing court, you see my students fighting about evictions. You go upstairs, you see them fighting about family law cases. You go up to the bankruptcy court, we've got our clinic in the bankruptcy court. My kids are in there representing people in bankruptcy, and it just, it goes on and on.
So I want to know a little bit about, this is shaking gears.
Good.
Outside the law.
Yeah.
Talk about your life through your career outside the law. What were your interests? What did you do? You mentioned your wives and.
Yeah, I've always, I just swam my mile before I came here today. I've always been a fitness nut. And I think, at my advanced age, that's the reason I can still keep going with some energy. And it's morphed over the years, from I was a runner, I had a marathon group and we did that for a while. But as you get older, that's hard on your body. I swim 6 or 7 days a week now. And there's just always been that piece of that for me in whatever I've been doing. My law clerks used to laugh because they say, how do you schedule court when you travel? And they'd say, he knows the lap schedule of every Y in Eastern North Carolina. So we work around that. He knows when he can get a lane in Newbern or Wilmington or Greenville. So yeah, there's some of that. I'm a gardener. I grew up in a big agricultural family, and everybody grew things, and I got that bug, and so that's one of my hobbies. I've worked really hard to improve the look of a law school with landscaping and planters and things because that's important to me, and I think it's important to everyone's health. And the other thing that I've always had, and I tell young lawyers this, I have 1,000 acquaintances, probably 100 people who'd say they're my friend, but I've got 2 best buddies, and they've been my best buddies for years. And we have regular things we do together, and, we really live in each other's souls. And particularly during COVID, having them they were both running other different organizations, like I was running an organization. And one isn't. One's I don't mind telling you who they are because everybody knows. One's Judge Ridgway, who was trying to deal with running the court system here, and the other is my great friend Thomas Sayer, who's the sculptor and architect here. He's trying to run an architecture practice, so remotely. So, and I think that's important. I think those consistent, lifelong friendships that you put a lot of energy into really keep you going.
When you are swimming laps and when you're gardening, are you thinking about the law?
Often. Now, the best thing about swimming laps, I discovered about 3 years ago, I have a flawless MP3 underwater player. So I'm actually listening to all my favorite music while I'm swimming laps, but I'm still thinking. Yeah, I will a lot of days, I'll go into the pool befuddled by how I ought to deal with something, what I ought to do, and I'll come out and I'll have a solution. And I swim with these guys usually, and usually there's coffee after, and that's usually where I try out my solution. This is what was bothering me. This is what I think I'm going to do. And we sort of start coffee with, okay, who needs the floor? Who's got something pressing that they want to talk about today?
I want to ask you, where do you see the future of the profession going? You're with all these young folks who are coming up. They're going to be attorneys. They have that fire. Where do you see the profession going?
I'm no seer. The market has turned since I've been dean. It was pretty rough when I started, really favorably for young lawyers right now. My folks are not having that much trouble finding good positions, good jobs. Partly that's growth here. I think it's one of the things we are spending a lot more time on with our students, and the accreditors are suggesting that we do this, is we're working a lot more now on soft skills, on interviewing, on empathy, on understanding, on how do you really understand a situation and its emotional background, rather than just going in with the rules of evidence and the rules of criminal procedure and trying to beat somebody up. And I think as mediation becomes more important, arbitration, you're going to need those sorts of skills. So I think we're hopefully going to turn out more balanced lawyers who have got the ability to advocate when they need to, but have also got the ability to craft a reasonable resolution based on what their clients need.
What is your advice to those next generation ones?
Find something you love. Find a niche, an area, and it might not come at first, and it might be what surprises you. If you'd told me, when I was in law school I was going to be a bankruptcy judge, that would have been the oddest thing anybody. You could have said you're going to be a lion tamer, and they would have seemed equally plausible. So you just have to keep, you gotta keep your eyes and ears open, and you got to be brave when the opportunity comes. I do a speech sometimes, and it's called "And Then the Phone Rang." And it's about all the times in my life where I thought I was doing exactly what I was going to be doing, and I wasn't ever going to change it. And then the phone rang. And as soon as I heard what might be plausible, I knew, I think this might be what I need to do. And I tell them, do that. Follow your heart when you get chances to do so.
And my last question for you.
But there's one thing I got to tell you about before we're done.
Tell me.
Because the other thing that has been enormously important to me in my career is that in 1994, I got a call from the State Department saying, would you like to go to Zambia as a consultant? And I said, sure, where's Zambia? And I know we're running out of time, but and I wrote a book about this because, so 8 weeks later, I was in Lusaka, up to my elbows in files in the High Court of Zambia, trying to help them come up with a case management system, because that's what I knew how to do. And they liked me and I liked them, and that led to 20 years and over 70 trips to sub-Saharan Africa working with courts there. So I've spent really a lot of time with the courts in Zambia, in Tanzania, in Namibia. And when I got to the law school, Africa was so life-changing for me that I said, I'm going to figure out a way for my law students to do this. So now I started and I lead a summer program to Ghana every summer. And I take a group of law students there, and it is really powerful for them. It changes entirely the way they see the world put together. So that's huge. That's also been ask what I do for fun. I guess going to Africa was the hardest work I've ever done, but it was also some of the most rewarding.
Is that the legacy you're proudest of?
I'm proud of all of it. I really am. I'm proud of the things I did in the court. I'm not much of a look-backer. People always say, which job do you like best? And I said, what job? But this is the job now. This is what I'm doing. But I really am proud. I'm proud of what the courts I ran did. I'm proud of what the law school's done. I'm proud of the contributions I made in Africa. It's been a good run. I had some really, and I'm not bitter. I mean, you probably don't know this about me, but President Clinton nominated me twice, once for the Fourth Circuit, once for the district court, and I had, unanimous, well-qualified ratings from the ABA. I had every lawyer in North Carolina supporting me. The only person who didn't support me was Senator Helms, and it turned out he had the blue slip that had to be sent back to the chair of the Judiciary Committee before I could have a hearing on either nomination, and he kept it in his desk. And I just let that go. I mean, I've had friends who got that close, and it's all they could talk about forever. I'm like, life went on. I had other good choices. I had other good chances. Sorry it didn't work out. It would have been fun to be the chief judge of the Fourth Circuit, but it didn't come my way.
In 20 years, for the 120th, who are we going to be interviewing?
I hope a lot of my graduates. I see talent all around me. I see lots of young lawyers who are starting to do great things, but I can't tell you how it's going to develop. For one thing, getting to some of these positions is so fluky. All these kids come up to me and say, I really want to be a federal judge. How do you do it? And I said, buy a lottery ticket. You got about the same chance. It just turns out to be, in the right place at the right time with the politics lining up, and you just can't predict it and you can't control it. So I don't know. I don't think I'll be here to see you, but I hope, I'm sure there'll be. And I'll end on this because I use it all the time, and it's, I think, a metaphor for what you just said. When Judge Dupree was retiring, the lawyers were bereft, and they would often say, it's just not going to be the same without you here. I mean, you do all the heavy lifting. And he would always get a twinkle in his eye and say, another patriot will rise. And that's what I tell, and folks say that about me, and that's usually my ending remark. None of us are irreplaceable. Another patriot will rise.
Thank you, Dee. We appreciate it.
Thank you.